Hello, hello, my dear friends and family. Captain Obvious, of course. Captain Starsky here, also Captain Obvious, just a bit. So good to see you, my friends. Simon, oh my god, so good that you're there in the chat as well. Jonathan is somewhere in your area, by the way. And today we will talk with Jonathan directly. He will join us in just a second. I really, really hope so. Please let me see if I have any messages from him. No, apparently he's trying to connect. So while we are waiting for Jonathan, and there he is. Oh my god, they say don't mention the devil because he will appear. Jonathan, my friend, can you hear me? Because I can see some like blah blah blah. Houston connection. Okay, let's give Jonathan just a bit more time to set everything up. Greetings, oh my god, greetings to Cardiff. My favorite oblast outside Ukraine is, of course, Cardiff. Legendary, absolutely legendary place. Remember, Jonathan is British and will therefore be drinking heavily, 100%. I have no doubt about that. Jonathan is a good live stream guest. He loves to talk. Yeah, I completely agree with you, my friend. And generally speaking, he's right now in Ukraine, and I won't even interrupt him much. Hello, Carlito, and everybody else. Tasmanian Devil, yeah, we were talking like this is the proof that this actually works. All right, as soon as you mention the devil, bam, he's there. So it does work for sure. All right, I can see Jonathan smiling. Let me see if I can add him to the screen. All right, and we can hear
Here
you.
it is. Woohoo! That's real.
Yay! Hello, my friend. So good to see you.
Okay, yeah. Hello. Great to see you. Everything's buffering a little bit there. I don't know what's going on there. Can you hear me okay?
It's fine. Don't worry about that. I mean, you are in Ukraine. However, it's known that internet in Ukraine is generally
I'm in the
better
UK.
than
I'm
anywhere in
back
the
in the
world.
UK. Blame the UK for the rubbish internet.
Ah,
If
so
this
you're
was
back.
Ukraine, it would be much better.
Okay.
I'm back.
Again, very good that you're back then, because I have some news I will talk about just later. Please tell us, first of all, how are you? Is everything fine? And generally, what is your latest observations in Ukraine? What's the situation there in terms of drones and ballistics? Please go on.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so I'm back. I'm in one piece, and each trip it feels that it's something of an achievement to actually come back in one piece. We'll talk about that later because there are more and more incidents, and not just that I'm taking more risks. There are more and more incidents that you encounter in everyday life. And of course, the other thing is you get to know more people locally. You start to experience the raids through their eyes. Some have families, you start to empathize. And I think that adds a whole other layer of experiencing it, other than just being, in a concrete bunker of a hotel. I have to admit, I've only done that twice now. And actually, unfortunately, some people have been killed on the way from their apartments trying to get to bunkers. So that's another thing. Now, obviously, the thing that's changed, and the thing that's changed in the last couple of weeks is that Russia understands that the interceptors, these are the PAC-3, the sort of Patriot type interceptors, are at a very, very low supply. When they do a raid, there are either none or just a handful of these things. They know, therefore, that if they sling, 8, 9, 10, even 10, 20 ballistics at a city like Kiev, they understand that most of those are going to get through. Whether those hit an actual military target or not, Russians essentially don't care. We know the guidance systems aren't brilliant. Sometimes, of course, they do hit military objects, and we're not going to mention any specifically, but And of course, there's good reasons why Ukrainian government would not talk about when an actual factory is hit, etc. Occasionally, it's reported in the news, sometimes not. But the fact is, Russians don't care if those end up in an apartment building. They really aren't really going to care one bit. They see it as a terror campaign, the logic of which they believe Ukrainians will eventually fold and capitulate to their demands because it will get too much to bear. It is obviously completely delusional. And we'll come back to that again because, that has some bearing on the winter and how things might play out. But it's got a terrifying new quality, which is that now you will often hear the strike before you hear the trevoga or the alert. And I think, I mean, Kiev is an enormous city, so the probability of you being in a strike is low. However, Ukrainians are quite well. Often they're quite well connected, and the networks of communication are quite good. So yes, your chances of being in a strike are low, but they're not zero. And actually, it often happens that you will know someone who knows someone, or in the most recent strike, or one of the most recent strikes, where
It's like, so sorry for interrupting. It's like
yeah.
statistically, if there is a strike in Kiev, your chance of being hit is basically 1 out of 100. But after 100 strikes, it kind of grows, right?
1 in 100. Surely it's much less than that. I mean, a population of I don't know. My maths isn't my strong point, but in a population of what's the population of Kiev?
So
Like a couple of million?
it was between 2 and 5, depending on seasons and depending on the war. So
Yeah. Between 2 and 5 million, and maybe 2 or 3 people on average per strike killed. So your chances are incredibly low statistically. But obviously, if you, as you say, as you go through more of them. Having said that, of course, because of this network effect of powers of separation, it often happens that you will know somebody who knows somebody, whether it's a relative or a classmate or a friend or a colleague at work. So that does increase the sense of risk, the sense of intimacy, the sense that Russians are trying to kill you personally and your friends, family, and people you love. That adds an element of terror, but of course, Russia is also spacing these attacks out in that often the initial attack may even be in daylight, and there may be gaps in between the ballistic strikes, with the last ones being in the morning. So they're really, the intention is to sow terror. The intention is to break people's sleep patterns, to not just understand that the monsters come out at nighttime, but that actually the monsters can now come out at daytime and nighttime. It's pure terror. It's pure terror. There's no other word for it, and every Ukrainian knows this. They know that it's senseless slaughter by a psychopath and a nation of slaves that carry out the orders of that psychopath, some of whom do it with glee and willingly. Every Ukrainian understands this, and it's increasingly hurtful. I think many have resigned themselves to it, but it's increasingly hurtful to see how little empathy there is, even amongst Western allies and the public. So little understanding, so little strategic empathy, so little morality in international politics. I think every Ukrainian understands that they're grateful for the support they do get from allies, but they understand that this war will only be won or lost off their own efforts, their own innovation, and their own courage. And they're also acutely aware that when they do win, there'll be many that try to steal that honor and courage from them and take credit for the victory that will be entirely theirs. Those are some of the impressions. I mean, they sound fairly dark, actually, when I play them back, but there are extraordinary moments of light as well. The protests happening in Kiev have an extraordinary exuberance and life to them. You still have an incredible pleasure in food and trying to create good things and cozy things and beautiful things. And there are still many people who will assist and help each other. It's not universal, but there's many examples of that sort of extraordinary sort of human connection. So it's a contrast. It's an unbelievable, extraordinary contrast, being in Ukraine every day. But yeah, the horror is there, and it's very palpable. As I say, in that strike that hit a um, a drone tech event, I know of two people connected to people I know well who passed just in that one strike. So it feels very direct, very immediate.
I absolutely agree with you. Today, unfortunately, I learned that another friend of mine also lost his life. It happened around 2024. And actually, it's a very sad story. He was in my brigade, he was in my company, and 2019 he was wounded. Actually, I wanted to talk just a bit about this. Yevhen Gorbanenko, call
Yes, I
sign,
think you
call sign,
mentioned him to me.
yeah,
Yeah.
call sign Gorby. So he was wounded 2019. I visited him in the hospital, and he was a big guy. He loved sports and stuff, and he was young, 25 or something. And I visited him in hospital that day, approximately like couple of weeks after he was shot, and he was shot in the stomach by a sniper at the Svetlodarsk Bulge, where we were operating. You can see how thin he is on this picture, and literally like next year you can see him standing on the right. Like those were the competitions, basically like Invictus Games in Ukraine, and he's standing there on the right. He started working out, he rehabilitated, even though he had his like part of his bladder basically in his pocket at all times, but he managed. And unfortunately, from what I know, um, 2024, that's according to my friends. Fortunately, I don't know all the details, but 2024 he disappeared, missing in action, and recently it was confirmed that he was KIA, and 6th of August in Kiev there will be his funeral. So that's his story. I mean, very very tough to learn that people actually die just that fast, but they always come into our lives to make it
I'm
better,
sorry
I
to hear
think,
it. Yeah.
and yeah, and probably teach us something, I think. Tell me, what's the craziest story that happened to you in Ukraine these days?
I mean, there are a lot of them. I had my first hetman experience in Kharkiv. Now, if anyone doesn't know what the hetman is, yeah, OS, explain what the hetman is.
I'm
And why,
not.
when you have 3 Ukrainians in a room, you end up with 4 hetman.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why Ukrainians are so good at doing anarchy, and so like not that good at doing chain of command. That's basically when you have 5 Ukrainians in the room, 3 of them are commanders, and 2 of them are, like Vasya and Ivanko, who do all the stuff. Again, like that's part of our culture, and we cannot change it.
And I had that experience in Kharkiv where 3 people were supposed to be helping me to organize events, and very kindly offered their services to help, organize interviews, et cetera, et cetera. On day 3, I realized that some of them were contacting the same people. They were trying to organize slots over each other. I'm like, okay, let's get everybody in the room, get them to talk to each other. This sounds like a good idea. Turned out to be the wrong idea. It was a little bit like introducing young male lions to, the the old head of the pride, the old angry kind of male that's won all the fights he's ever fought. And it went down that way as well. The old lion chased off, first of all, the middle-aged one who was like, I'm out of here. He actually knew both of them. He's like, I want to stay friends with them. I'm out of here. And then the younger one and the old lion went head to head about who was going to be in command, who was going to monopolize my time. And yeah, the young one was eventually chased off. He was out. A great deal of shouting and gesticulating took place. And as a British person, I mean, I have Ukrainian friends who are encouraging me and helping me to shed my British shyness and reticence. For those who know me, I'm not that shy and reticent, really not so typically British either. But in this circumstance, my Englishness, my Britishness came out, and I was sitting there thinking, oh man, this is so embarrassing. This is just so awful. How can they all be shouting at each other? And this is all my fault. And the fact that one of them was introduced by a friend, and it was one of her best friends. I'm like, this is so embarrassing. How am I going to ever apologize? Fortunately, she understood. I described the circumstances, and she just said, don't worry, you've had your first Hetman experience. I've been through dozens of these. You just have to let them, you just have to let them do their thing and not worry about it. So that was kind of interesting. That was a real induction into a certain aspect of Ukrainian culture. And let's face it, it's Kharkiv. People are a lot more direct. I mean, Ukrainians are more direct than anyone in Britain typically, but it seems there's a certain directness and lack of polish, let's say, to the Kharkiv way of doing things. They're not going to sugarcoat anything for you. They're going to tell you exactly what they think of everything.
Yeah, people from Kharkiv are like Dutch, they don't sugarcoat anything. They just say straight, no matter if you like it or not. Yeah, but again, returning to the topic, you are in Ukraine. Would really like you to talk just a bit more about your mission, but you are in Ukraine. A lot of my friends are now in Ukraine. Basically, now I feel what my friends feel when I served myself, because you keep worrying for them literally every day. Checking all the monitoring channels and all that stuff.
You have the alerts. I still, maybe it's not good for mental health, but I have the critical alerts for the Kiev region. Why? People ask, well, why you still got those if you're not in the country? It's because I now have friends, and I know their families in some instances. In some instances, they're just friends, and you can't help but think about them when those alerts go off and wonder, what's happening. And that brings it home. I mean, one of the stories that I was going to share, and I shared with you earlier, it's kind of amusing in a certain way, but of course it's absolutely not amusing. It's dark, and it shows that everybody is living in a kind of roulette wheel, as it were, of fortune and misfortune. In this instance, I took a Bolt taxi, and those who've used Bolt or Uklon will know what that is. I took a Bolt taxi from the center to one of the outlying districts called Brovary, and there are two supermarkets there which actually have this. It's the same name. It's part of the same chain, but one's at the start and one's at the end. And I needed the first one, not the second one. And Bolt always confuses them. It always puts the pin in the wrong place. So I explained to the taxi driver, I need the first one. The other one is just not convenient. And I had tons of bags with me because I was going to go to the coach and on the plane afterwards. Of course, he drives straight past it. I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, I'm following the map. Yeah, but I told you that's the wrong one. I don't care. The map tells me this. Anyway, he drops me at the other one, and we have a furious argument while the car's still moving, and then when it stops as well. And I moved to Russian because he didn't speak English. And it turned out that this guy, maybe this tells you something, was fairly fluent in Russian. In fact, he didn't seem to have an accent or the usual accent. So maybe that tells you something about him. But it was like a 10-minute full-on argument, and I shed all of my Britishness there. And I'm like, are you a human? Are you a person? What the hell are you doing? Can't you think for yourself? what kind of Soviet mindset you've got. You can't even, you're driving back to Kiev and you can't drop me off. Because initially he said, look, if I have to drop the other shop, I have to go all the way back to Kiev and then turn around, which is complete BS, because there's a roundabout just a mile down the road. Anyway, he can drop on the other side of the road. So we just had this furious kind of argument. And eventually, because I needed to be picked up by somebody else and to go further down that road to go out to a dacha. And this whole detour thing cost me about 10 minutes of my journey time. I would have been on my way 10 minutes earlier without this furious argument. And then this driver, he had the cheek of it. He had the cheek to drop me off, circle around the block, go and buy himself a coffee, and then come back and continue the argument with me, which was slightly unnerving as well, almost as if he enjoyed it. Anyway, 10 minutes is what this whole confrontation cost me. And then we started down the road, as I say, 10 minutes late. But we came to a roadblock. Now, if you come across a roadblock, police have just sealed a road off. In any Western country, that usually means it's a car accident, and actually can pretty frequently mean that in Ukraine as well. But we pulled over and asked the police, why can't we go down there? What's going on? And he just said, I think the word was probil, or there's been a strike. And what had actually happened is a Shaheed. And if people can't imagine what these drones are, they're the size of a mini metro. They're big beasts with quite an explosive charge on them. This had hit the highway, and I believe from subsequent accounts that it actually hit a car or several cars and killed one driver 10 minutes before, literally 10 minutes. And it seems that if it wasn't for that argumentative Soviet-minded debil who we had an argument with, we could well have been, in the spot or near the spot where the drones struck. So there's this really curious sense of throwing the dice. Every time you do even something quite basic like going out to the dacha at the weekend.
Absolutely. What a crazy story. And such stories happen in Ukraine these days all the time. But one very typical thing that we can see, like the trend that started all the way back in 2014, is Russia's atrociousness towards Ukrainian civilians. Probably everybody already saw this video about a Ukrainian man showing groceries and Russian drone trying to attack this man. Luckily for this local man, it was in Kherson just this morning. Luckily, he survived, and I really, really hope that he will live long enough to see the collapse of the entire Russian Empire. You can see that he's running from the FPV drone, and the drone strikes the car. He had several injuries, the shell shock, and several fragment injuries. And just like this afternoon, an interview was published with him. I'm not trying to play it because it's a bit long, but basically what he says is that he heard, he was there with his wife, he heard the drone coming, and then he saw that the drone is flying towards him and his wife, and he tried to show, like, look, I only have groceries, I have like tomatoes and cucumbers, I don't have weapons. And then the drone started chasing the man and eventually hit the car. The car is damaged beyond the repair. The engine is destroyed, and a lot of his groceries were also destroyed in that attack. And the people keep asking the same question. Of course, I'm not mentioning that Russians already made a lot of explanations for what happened. First of all, they said that the man was obviously smuggling weapons because, Ukrainian tomatoes and cucumbers are a killer, all right? Everybody knows that. Then they said that they saw through the drone that he was harassing a woman, apparently his wife, which together with him was like unloading those groceries, and they used the
Probably
drone
arguing about the price of groceries.
Yeah, I don't know. But not necessarily it happened for real, of course, because we know that Russians always say truth, right? And also the Russians say it's like in their social media. I just read it. They say that basically it was also, besides all those reasons, it was also not their drone. So like everything there, just like with MH17, and people keep asking over and over again, like, why are the Russians so atrocious? Because people in the West cannot comprehend that in 2026, some people can be basically like ISIS, all right, only living in partially European continent and considered like a superpower or like civilized country, speaking of Russia, all right. How is that even possible, and what's the reason behind that? What do you think about
It
this?
gets worse. It gets worse, and I don't want to depress you, but I'm gonna put on full anger here. In the same week, there was an incident where a Ukrainian drone, which apparently was on its way towards Putin's palace, I think it was Gelinchiki or Valdai or one of
Yeah, yeah.
those, it was taken out or disrupted either by Russian air defense or electronic warfare, one of those, and it fell onto a beach where Russians were, holidaying, and it killed 6. The Western headlines are all Ukrainian drone kills Russians, really without providing the context that the drone was heading somewhere else, without the context that Russian action took it down over that location, and without the context that actually Russian propaganda moved so quickly to amplify this. It seems fairly plausible, even very likely to me, that the Russians would intentionally take it down to cause casualties in their own people, because this is a very convenient propaganda stunt. Now, anyone who says, oh, hang on a second, that's a little far-fetched, I'm afraid you know nothing about Russian history. You know nothing about Putin's period in power. He has wantonly slaughtered his own people for political gain, or turned tragedy into a political weapon over and over and over again. We have Nordost, we have Beslan, we have innumerable other incidents that were weaponized and utilized to create regime propaganda, which involved mountains of corpses, including children. We have the apartment bombings, which cemented Putin's grip on power and launched the Second Chechen War. So this is well within their FSB playbook. Their own population is simply material to them, to be expended at will and on a whim. This should be the angle that Western media are covering, but unfortunately the reporting has almost no context, but also raises the question in my mind, are a bunch of Russian lives in the attacking nation more important than Ukrainian lives to the media, to the politicians, to the public? Why is our sympathy being elicited in this contextless sort of set of stories when the wholesale slaughter of Ukrainians that happens day in and day out is not covered? I'm afraid this is not just unprofessionalism. It is that by our media, but it talks to something far sicker and weirder that I struggle to comprehend and explain, actually.
Yeah, I remember one story from, I'm not sure if it's from Bushido. I think it's from Bushido, when people came to a wise man and said, look at the sect of Lotus Sutra. They are robbing people, they are killing people, slaughtering people, they are deluding people and committing different atrocities. And the wise man said, yes, that is why they are the sect of Lotus Sutra. If they did not do that, they would be a completely different sect. And the same is with Russians. They do that because basically that's something that makes them Russians. To those people who want to understand what we're talking about, here's, for example, a small episode from Kherson. This is, sorry for the sound, that is a kid basically holding a drone detector in her hands, and that is how the kids basically go out these days with those drone detectors, because that's sometimes the only thing that can save their lives. So they detect the Wi-Fi signals that the Russians are using to control their drones. Of course, if it's a fiber optic cable, they can only detect the drone by the sound. All right, but by that time that would be a bit too late. And kids like this, they are usually the targets of what Russians are calling the human safari. So basically, they are hunting those kids. They drop droppable charges. They strike them if it's a contact FPV drone, and those things like that the kid is holding in her hand is basically one of the things that are saving them from the Russian terror. And again, you don't see much of that. Again, that's Kherson, the city that is basically on the front line. The distance between the controlled part of Kherson and the Russian terrorists is absolutely minimal. It's mere kilometers, like less than kilometer, I think, between the banks of the river, and such
And there's only
things,
one Western
unfortunately, yeah,
journalist,
yeah.
yeah, there's only one Western journalist really covering this, which is Arina Zabriskie, who's been there at enormous personal risk, trying to cover this story. But it's why it doesn't get coverage, why it doesn't cause an absolute outrage, I just don't understand.
Because on one hand, like, I'm trying to explain it from the standpoint of psychology, even though I'm not a psychologist, but logically we don't talk much about things that make us feel uncomfortable for extended period of time. That's one of the reasons why we see decreasing amounts of people, for example, watching content about Ukraine. They're getting tired from bad news, from shocking news, because that's terror that they can just turn off and choose not to watch. In Ukraine, people don't have such opportunity. They have to do that every single day. They have to go through this fear and anxiety on a daily basis, and of course danger. But people watching YouTube channels like my or your YouTube channel, they can choose just not to watch it, and it makes their life easier. Another thing is, there are news that actually attract much more attention, and like, you understand it yourself, that any editor of any TV channel will tell you that, all right, if we can keep covering Ukraine while we have soccer, football, when we have, I don't know, celebrities either joining or breaking up, or, divorcing and stuff, yeah, they will lose audience. So that's another reason for that, as much as I can see that.
I mean, I think there's also a tendency in the news, and I'm gonna, well, on those strikes as well. It's not just Kherson now. Sumy is becoming as drone saturated as Kherson. It's exceedingly dangerous to move. They've got a campaign to take out all the petrol stations in the area, in the approach in either Sumy or Kharkiv, in between the villages that are close to the front. There's almost no petrol stations left. That leaves people vulnerable if they have to make those journeys. They're now starting to work on those petrol stations inside, say, the ring road of Kharkiv. And indeed, when I was there, a petrol station about 300 meters from where I was staying was taken out in broad daylight. A man seriously injured, and the whole thing burnt down. Last week in Kharkiv, a professor going to work was killed in his own car inside the ring road by an FPV drone. So this hunt is extending, and if they're allowed to do it, if they're given impunity to do it, it won't just be Kherson. It'll be whatever towns in those areas within Donbass, and obviously on the neighboring oblasts of Donbass, will all be extended to include the human safari concept, which is an evil comparable to anything the Nazis did, frankly. But we don't seem to have historical imagination to really wrap our heads around it and recoil from the horror of it. I mean, I've been calling what we need a sort of dark empathy, the ability to understand how much evil Russia is willing to, and indeed is, propagating in Ukraine. Unfortunately, most people will recoil at that, don't want to inhabit or imagine that evil. But in order to defeat it strategically, I think we have to go to that place without being corrupted by it. It's not an easy thing, though. I'm not sure we spoke. Yeah, we didn't speak. I've also, I've been in Kharkiv, I've been in Kiev this last trip. I can't show the video for OPSEC reasons, but I will describe it because it is one of the most terrifying and extraordinary things I've ever seen. It is terrifying being in Kiev, for instance, when the strikes come, and especially where you hear the bang before you have the alert or siren. Also, that first night, the pattern of that changed. I was in Kiev, and unusually we had the air alerts through the day, and then we had the actual air alert in the evening when it was still light. And then the first strike sort of came almost without warning, and then through the night, and then in the morning they were still coming over. And this is a terrifying idea. I mean, I was describing to Ukrainian how I thought I heard an aeroplane, low flying, let's say a sort of small private jet, with the sort of the noise of the jet exhaust passing over, and then another, and then another. And my brain didn't register at first that actually this is the sound of missiles passing over. They're exceedingly loud. In Kharkiv as well, there was a Zircon flew over in broad daylight above a park with hundreds of children playing and sand pits and so on, and then was intercepted and blown up about 30 seconds later. These things are absolutely terrifying, absolutely kind of terrifying. But as Ukrainians said to me, if you can hear it, then it's not got your name on it. Because of the delayed effect of the sound, it means that it's probably already struck, and the person that didn't hear it has had an extremely bad day. If you hear it, then it means it's already passed, and it's not got your name on it. I found that not comforting, though. I found that to be an incredibly chilling kind of thought. But I have, since we last spoke, been to Kharkiv for a week, which was an extraordinary experience. That really does feel more like your in the eye of the storm. I say, obviously, it feels more terrifying in Kiev at the moment psychologically, but in terms of probability, it is still very low probability of being caught in one of those strikes. And but in Kharkiv, it's continuous. There were 7 cabs the day we arrived. There's continuous artillery fire outgoing. There's all sorts of strange lights in the sky, whether they're outgoing drones or it's difficult to tell, difficult to know. The city has a blackout, a bit like the Blitz in London. You have monitoring drones which are constantly buzzing and flying past our window. You don't always know whether they're yours or the other guys. And the air alerts go off almost continuously. There are many instances in Kharkiv where one alert finished, and then 30 seconds later, the alert kicks off again. Despite all of that, it felt strangely calm in the center of Kiev. The center of Kharkiv. You've got Derzprom, you've got cafes, you've got stuff, you've got beautiful parks. You got some really lovely, attractive buildings. Now, a lot of restaurants and cafes are closed down since the full-scale war, but you can still go out and get, decent food. You can go and get sushi and pastries and whatnot. But every building bears the scars of attacks, either recent or from the full-scale invasion where there were pitched battles in the center of Kharkiv. And every street will have a devastated building. So you really feel the intensity of it far more. But there is, despite all that, a sense of stoicism and calm in the center of town. But my host, quite against his wife's advice, took me at first to Saltivka, a sort of suburb of Kharkiv, which was extremely badly knocked up during the full-scale invasion. So there were a lot of wrecked apartment blocks there. You could see the tank rounds where they'd come in and so on. But even that was okay. It didn't feel particularly dangerous. There were families out and people around, and even fixing up some of those blocks. Now, the bit that really unnerved me, and I kind of wish he hadn't, but I did it, and it's an experience I want to relay. I'm not doing it again, and I don't go out there to court risk. That's really not what it's all about. I go out there to get material that's going to help people imagine the war and support Ukraine. It really serves nobody, including my own interests, if I get myself injured or killed. It's really not sensible at all. But despite being advised not to do that, he took me out on the ring road, and my friend there assured me that there were lots of cars on the ring road, and actually it's been well protected and everything will be fine. That wasn't exactly true. Yes, fishing nets have been put up along the side walls, on the sides and over the tops. We drove for 5 kilometers on the ring road. Well, first of all, we went through the military barrier and, winds down the window, asks for our documents, and then has 2 sort of strange foreigners talking Russian at him. He just thought, yeah, whatever, and said, yeah, if you really want to go, then we can't stop you. I think that was it. It's in that direction, and we headed towards the eco park, which was completely destroyed. But all the petrol stations, all the buildings are burnt out. My friend lied. There were no other cars on the road, except for burnt out ones. And he drove at about 100 kilometers an hour, because apparently at that speed, it's far more difficult for an FPV pilot to hit a moving target. Below 100 kilometers an hour, then your probability of being hit increases quite dramatically. But imagine a road with a fair amount of potholes, nothing else on it, and burnt out cars on the side, and you're going 100 kilometers an hour. I thought, well, if the drone doesn't get us, then this insane driving will absolutely get us. We'll hit a pothole and we'll just be flipping over. Anyway, after about 5 kilometers of this, we came to the end of the drone netting, and there was a team, which must be the most dangerous job in Ukraine. There was a team of people building the drone netting, extending it, mile by mile on this road. And I just thought, these guys are so exposed. Every day there are FPV attacks, FPVs hunting on the outskirts of Kharkiv for victims. I said, let's get off the road. There's no way I'm going to be on a road with an open sky. So at that point, he agreed that it was a little too scary. We headed in. Within a few minutes of us heading into town, the Trevoga, the alarm went off, and we looked on the Telegram channels and realized that there were drones in the area trying to hunt civilians. So again, we had a sort of close call there. I don't advise anyone really to sort of take those kind of risks. It's not something I would necessarily choose to do either. But given that I had the experience, I wanted to kind of relay it, and I'll probably use that footage in an episode at some point. But it really felt, and that ring road is not far from the city centre. It's only a 20-minute drive from the central Kharkiv out to the ring road. And you really are then get the impression that you're the eye of the storm. You do feel kind of calm in the sort of hipster cafes and Derzprom in the center of town. Despite all the evidence of warfare, you realize that you're literally sitting in this little zone of relative safety. And I use the word relative advisedly here. And really very, very close to you is something that is absolutely a war zone. But there are still people who live in the villages outside the ring road, and they get killed and maimed with a high degree of frequency. How they keep supplies going, and the people who actually make some of those trips regularly, it's risk that I can barely contemplate.
Yeah, I agree on that. Speaking of cars, my friends, we have two things to talk about. First of all, exactly because the cars are being destroyed so much, we need more cars for Ukrainian defenders, and that is why we keep running our tiny fundraiser, the Summer Sunshine Trucks 2026 for the border guards. So we are almost halfway there, as you can see. 78 donations were received so far, and those people are absolutely legendary. Please find the link in the description. Please support them, my friends. This is very, very important because they are expecting this truck very, very soon. Those things are absolutely crucial nowadays, and they will always be. Another thing is we already have quite a few questions here. We have a commentary from Altruistic Viking who says, sadly, it will be an unfair fight, Ukraine following the rules and orcs breaking them all without proper consequences. Do you have anything to comment on this one?
No, we know that the Russians break the rules, and we know that Ukrainians, by and large, follow it. And indeed, this is even, I don't know if you've seen this, but this is, I've seen many videos, and it's not just the videos of people wailing about their little businesses going under because of wildberries. There are actually many videos and some commentary of Russians saying that they feel relatively safe despite the alerts, despite the drones. Why is that? It's because many Russians realize that Ukrainians do not target civilians. Many of them realize that actually the degree of accuracy with which Ukrainian drones are hitting refineries and warehouses without any civilian side effects, they probably don't realize how unprecedented this is in history. But they are starting to realize that Ukrainians do not fight like them. Does that lead them to respect Ukrainians? Does that lead them to have any sympathy for Ukraine, or to somehow join the dots and realize that Ukraine is actually the better civilization? No, none of that logical conclusion is going to be made by a single orc. But they know that their side plays dirty and that the Ukrainian side doesn't. And for them, they just have this sense that personal risk is lower. That's not quite what worries me so much, because I think Ukraine is effective. I think Russia's tactics are brutal and horrific, but they are inefficient when it comes to strategic objectives. So actually, the brutality plays against them in the grand scheme. The brutality we saw in Irpin, Bucha, and other places plays against them because it has united almost all Ukrainians in opposition to them. And it has really crystallized the understanding of who is right and who is wrong, and the total unambiguous nature. So I think their tactics backfire horribly on them. No, what worries me far more is that as Robert Magabrovdi and others scale up the effectiveness with which they are erasing the Russian economy, it is actually Western allies that will start to put pressure. And at the point where Russia is facing defeat and collapse, Western allies will step in to say, okay, well, enough is enough. Now is the time to stop the killing. Ukraine, that's it. Well done, boys, but you need to go back to the changing room now. And we cannot let you finish Russia off. We cannot let you inflict humiliating defeat on them. We cannot let you push them to the point of systemic collapse. Well done. You get a little pat on the back and some gold stars, but we're all going to move on now and be jolly good friends together. I don't think Western countries have the balls to imagine a victory and to support Ukraine through to a victory.
I agree with you. And by the way, speaking of Russians who literally don't care about Ukrainian drones. Again, that strike in Gelendzhik when the Russians shot down the drone, and by the way, they admitted it themselves that they actually shot it down. You can see that they start shooting at it. It rolls and banks and falls on the Russian heads. We have some very, very good commentary coming from Jam. Why would anyone go to the beach in a war zone? 100%. First of all, there's crazy people coming from Russia to Crimea, knowing that there's no fuel, no electricity, no grocery stores operating in Crimea whatsoever, because they want to go to the beach in the occupied land, which is an active war zone, because to them it's cheaper than going to Sochi, right? And they go there with their kids, knowing that Ukrainians generally don't strike civilians. And when such things happen, they immediately understand that actually war is a very, very cruel thing. You know, my lady today asked me whether I feel sorry for the Russian kids who die like that. And I realize that, the more I watch things like this, right? The more I watch things like this, the less I really do feel sorry about those kids. But on the other hand, I kind of do still, because unlike Ukrainians, unlike Americans, unlike British, Russian kids are not valued by Russian parents at all. They literally grow new generations of Russian invaders. They send them to the military camps while they're still kids. They indoctrinate them. They talk to them about the necessity to die for Putin as early as in the kindergarten, where they have the so-called talks about the important разговоры о важном.
Главных.
With the kids. And they have that in the kindergartens, in elementary school and middle school. And basically they grow the invaders. And then he dies. You receive lada and fish. He doesn't die. He gets captured. You just go, you're not Roma. You're not my son. You know, like in that famous video. That was absolutely insane. And the point is, you have right to love somebody, respect somebody, hate somebody. You have right as a person. It's about not what you feel, but do you follow the law, right? It's about what you do. And we can see that Ukrainians, no matter what we feel and think about Russians, which we are not running towards them with like brothers, no, fuck those brothers. I would wish them all, disappear one day, become a fertilizer, 100% of them. But I don't think that I will ever do anything like that, because one way or another, we don't fight the dragon to become dragons, right? And when you said about the respect, like, do Russians respect Ukrainians for not striking their civilians? They will never respect us. It's like obvious thing. And we Ukrainians will never care about their respect at all, which is, by the way, I think can be addressed to this commentary as well. Can Ukraine win the hearts and minds of the Russian people? I don't know how to win something that doesn't exist physically, all right? What's your opinion on that?
This is a difficult one, isn't it? Because, and I've had a couple of conversations about this recently with some geopolitical experts who sort of understand what's going on. This is the team at Chatham House. And they're pointing out that actually the process of negotiation is extremely dangerous, not just because, of Russia's maximalist aims, not just because you cannot really negotiate with Putin. That's not how he functions, or the fact that negotiation is just an aspect of warfare in the Russian psychology. They're also pointing out that Western weakness, Western empathy, Western naivety and sympathy for Russians will absolutely be manipulated in such a process. Their wishful thinking about Russian opposition and how real or effective it can be will be manipulated because there is no such Russian opposition. Unfortunately, we enter this period where only Ukraine's continuation of the war until the point where Russia is confronted with some kind of systemic collapse, or at least a collapse in its ability to sustain military operations on the territory of Ukraine. That is the only way that anything resembling peace will be achieved. Everything else, I think, will be a state of not even the Cold War. This is a far more dangerous situation than the Cold War. What we are facing is a hot peace. A hot peace in which Russia is trying to destabilize and destroy our political institutions, is probably going to still be lobbing missiles and artillery at Ukraine, even if the lines are frozen, where prisoners of war, civilians, are going to be used in the most callous way as bargaining chips, where they may actually attack Europe directly to try and render NATO completely obsolete. We're facing a situation which I don't think mentally almost anyone in Europe is prepared for. At the moment, all those decisions are deferred because Ukraine is doing the fighting and the dying. It's because we don't have to examine our consciences. We don't have to think of Ukraine as being part of an integrated defense territory of Europe. We don't have to think of Ukrainian skies as European skies. There's a war there and there isn't one here, and we can think of them as far away and other. Well, I'm sorry, that thinking is going to come and bite Europeans in the arse very, very soon. Because if this war is frozen, we will start to realize that actually we live under one integrated European sky, one civilization, which includes Ukraine, and certainly does not include Russia, and that actually this war is not going to be contained. It is going to expand to the rest of European territory. I don't mean that Russia is going to be able to put, an invading army onto the soil and take Europe. I don't think they have that capability or the ability to really govern or suppress such a territory. But they can use long-range terror through drones and missiles to extend that war into Europe, especially if the US, as is highly likely, refuses to lift a finger to do anything about it. So we're reaching a very dangerous inflection point where, unfortunately, Western weakness and naivety is the worst possible approach to go into this phase, and only Ukraine seems to understand Russia and the full depths of horror and its behavior, and it's the only country prepared to push back and approach Russia without fear.
Yeah, I agree on that. We have a second commentary from Keith saying it's not negotiating with the Russian forces, but with the Russian people, because when Ukraine invaded Russia, some civilians actually were happy to see Ukrainian soldiers. Well, yeah, I agree on
that's
that
a tricky
because
one there.
the Russians are happy to see anybody who gives them free medicine, free water, free food, who brings them to the doctor and stuff like that. It's generally a Russian thing, but
But also, I'm going to
yeah.
be harsher here. I'm going to be harsh here and say that those same people in subsequent videos also said they're so delighted to see, the return of their oppressors. Why?
Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Do you remember? Sorry for interrupting. Do you remember that lady who was gonna give birth to a baby, and she was taken by Ukrainian soldiers to the doctor, and she talks to the Ukrainian television about this fact that she's like, oh my god, she was supplied by Ukrainian medics and stuff. And then when the Russians returned in the next video, she says, they were torturing us, they were beating us and stuff. And that's the same kind of people generally.
Because they're nobody within the hierarchy of power. but they are trained that you have to show conformity to those in power. When the Ukrainians occupied the territory, they're the ones in power. When their own guys return, they know that their own guys are more brutal and more horrific. And especially when the Chechens are involved, it gets pretty nasty. They're going to say whatever they need to say to stay alive, but also that's the kind of the instinct there. I mean, this is completely off topic, but one of the most shocking conversations I ever had in Russia, ever had, and there were several. Believe me, this is very stiff competition here for the most shocking thing. This was a little village outside Novgorod Veliki, which was Novgorod was occupied by the Nazis, but some of the surrounding villages. No, sorry, the center of the town was occupied by the Soviets, but some of the surrounding villages were occupied by the Nazis. Some of them for quite an extended period. And I met a very elderly woman, in fact, a couple of elderly women who'd survived through that in German territory. And, you know, they were using the local church to calibrate their artillery and lobbing them into the center of Novgorod. And I said, was it bad under the Germans? You know, I mean, you had the Soviets in the 30s, you had the Civil War, etc. Then you had the German occupation. Was it bad under the Germans? And then she said something I would never have expected. She said, "Oh, that was a wonderful period under the Germans. Wonderful. The market was operating again. We could sell our butter and our cheese and our milk. We even had a little local newspaper. You can just imagine. I looked it up online afterwards. It's like a freaking Nazi newspaper produced locally in Cyrillic." And she just went on. She went on for minute after minute saying how wonderful the Germans were and how more humane and efficient it was living under the Germans than their own tyrants.
If you say
My mind was blown.
Like if you're saying that even the Nazi Germans that committed the most horrible crime and genocide of 20th century were still better than Russians. I think at least it must tell something, but unfortunately the Western audience is not acquainted with that. Yeah.
I mean, let's also face it. You know, the Nazis did commit atrocities in many villages, many places, and all across Ukraine. But just hearing this person that, yeah, you know, these lot were maybe not the best, but they were far better than the commissars.
Yeah. They are absolutely insane. I'm talking about, of course, Nazi Germans, but also about Russians. And the reason why the world couldn't see atrocities, the Russian committed atrocities on their own territory, is literally because of the Iron Curtain and literally because of the informational warfare, which is another reason why it's I believe absolutely impossible to actually win the Russian hearts and minds. Think about this way. Russia has the best repressive mechanism, like best repressive mechanism, the strongest repressive mechanism in our part of the world. We're talking censorship, we're talking repression of any independent media and stuff like that, repression of freedom of speech. You go outside with an empty banner, you're dead. You wave to the Russian police, you're dead, and stuff. That's, by the way, a very interesting topic. Besides that, they spend billions of dollars, between $2 and $8 billion on the annual basis, trying to establish their propaganda and disinformation on the West, and investing all those money in the bot farms, in the fake media, in paid propagandists, in different talking heads like Tucker Carlson, I don't know, Candace Owens and others in every given country of the world, massively. The question is, how exactly, without any equal, even from the standpoint of financing, right? How exactly, without any proper financing, without any proper resources, at least somehow comparable to what the Russians have in terms of informational warfare. How exactly do you even get into their informational field?
Well,
What do
this
you
is
think?
interesting, isn't it? I mean, because certain US, let's say, bloggers and influencers who are peddling Russian lines, some have started to change their tune, and this isn't because they suddenly have they've discovered morality or come to Jesus or something. The hint is that actually the money that fueled some of these narratives is starting to run dry. Russia is not paying its bills, and this tells us everything about their ecosystem. People generally, I think Laura Loomer maybe was the exception. People generally don't peddle Russian narratives because they like them and believe them. They peddle them because they're paid to do so. And some are very effective and some are less effective. But this is how Russia gets through. I think this is also what people fail to understand. The very essence of the Russian system, the vertical structure, even down to their geopolitics, is the absolute opposite of competition. They do not believe in competition. They do not believe in openness. They do not believe in fairness. They do not believe in any kind of democratic process where the future is not determined, where the future is not controlled, where the outcome is not known. This is intolerable for their entire system and mentality. They are against competition in all of its forms. And I think if that were properly understood, then we would mount far more resistance. It was easier to understand under communism because the very communist system, as implemented in Russia, abolished capitalistic competition between businesses and turned everything into a sort of state monopolies. And we know how that ended. It was easy to see the mechanics of that. But I have to tell people that the very Russian mindset itself is anti competitive. The oligarchic system, how everything's structured, how the dice are loaded, how resources are distributed, it crushes any sense of competition. And indeed, the idea of fair competition is completely intolerable to them. And unfortunately, they want to inject that kind of thinking into our environment, into our media. Um, they want to poison our spaces so that when we do engage in competitive dialogue and debate, it becomes toxic, it becomes repulsive, it becomes divisive. It goes from being a virtue into something that we want to retreat from and which they want us to distrust and disbelieve in the very idea that there is fair and equal competition. This, unfortunately, I think is going to be the story of this century, which is the injection of Russian values into our ecosystem, information ecosystem, social ecosystem, political ecosystem, and it really represents a poisoning of the well. It is why Ukraine and the revolution of dignity are so important, so fundamental, so refreshing, and the ongoing demonstrations that we see is because Ukrainians are fighting for competition as a force and all the amazing things that that can release within let's say, a regulated capitalistic system. Russia is the complete opposite of those values and therefore is not innovative. It doesn't have any solutions for humanity. All it can do is poison and destroy. The only things that have any chance of creating, I would say, fair, productive societies and indeed solve the innumerable problems that mankind is going to need to overcome.
100%. And when we talk about individuals like uh, Laura Loomer, Team Pool, like Laura Loomer, okay, I understand everything. Team Pool, dear friends in the chat, please tell me who the hell bribed Team Pool this time.
Yes. Who? Is it Gore this time? Who's got to him? Yeah.
Like I think maybe it was like not Kolomoisky, of course, but some of Ukrainian ones could have paid, because another how to say it, another confirmation that actually Ukrainian deep strikes work is basically, there you go. Tim Pool didn't receive his paycheck, and he's now pro-Ukrainian as well.
I'm not sure he's pro-Ukrainian. I think what he's doing here is, I didn't receive my paycheck. Right, I'm going to show to the guys that pay my bills that I can be a pain in the butt, right? Pay my bills or I'm going to carry on with this pro-Ukraine stuff. So I think it's slightly darker here. It's not flipped. And I don't think Ukraine is going to be paying him. It's just like, come on, pay your bills and I'll flip back again. I can show you how much damage I can do in the meantime. That goes wrong. I imagine, at some point he might receive a little plaster bust of himself, which itself becomes slightly combustible, because you don't want to play that game with the Kremlin. You don't want to take their money and then betray them. That's worse than what we're doing, which is never having been in their loyalty or pay before. You asked me about experiences in Ukraine. And there's one big one which I didn't sort of mention, and which I think is something which I cannot show the image, unfortunately, for operational security reasons, but I can describe it, and it makes a huge impression. You know what it's like to be in Kiev when the strikes happen. More often than not, you won't be in a place where you can see it, or you might see the glow, of the tops of buildings, or you might just hear, the sounds of explosions. And after a while, you come to recognize the sound of outgoing PVO, air defense, and then incoming, or the sound of a missile striking, because it just comes up through the floor. You feel the vibrations. It's proportionally louder. But that's inside the city. I had a completely new perspective, because for some of the time, and actually overnight last week, we deployed with a volunteer air defense unit about sort of between 60 and 80 kilometers north of Kiev. I won't say where or what side or any kind of direction, obviously. And this unit were using Pisun, the beautifully named Pisun, to intercept Shaheeds. It also gave me a new perspective as well, because as they're priming these things with explosives to try and take out Shaheed, you've not heard, how much innuendo you can get out of that idea, and how the Pisun are going to kiss the Russian projectiles. Anyway, it's a whole angle of Ukrainian humor I hadn't even realized was there. So and this was an extraordinary experience for me, because we went out early in the afternoon so we could see people preparing and getting ready, and it's out in the countryside, so they have a very old dacha with a Serhiy as their HQ, with all the equipment and explosives and batteries everywhere, and it's like, okay, should you really restore all of this stuff in a wooden house, with a lot of hay around? But anyway, and then they cook a sort of collective meal for the unit. So you're sitting outside, in the open, eating. As I say, it was there was plov and there was soup, and they're cooking it using whatever implements they can have to hand and whatever ingredients they can have to hand. So it might not be, it might not be a 5-star restaurant, but there's just something about sitting there and sort of eating collectively before they're heading out on a mission was really quite made an impression. But the thing that made the huge impression, and this is what also makes me incredibly angry seeing this, is that when the ballistic strikes came, they said, look in that direction, and at some point you'll see it. And so you're at night. It's like I think it was like 1:30 in the morning. The ballistics come in, and we saw a big flash in the sky. One of them's intercepted, and then I think it was 6 or 7 more land. Because you're out at that distance, you can't hear the impacts, but you see this extraordinary flash in the sky, which could be a little bit like a lightning storm, but you just see a flash coming up from below and then reflected in the layers of cloud. And I have to say, it was an absolutely apocalyptic experience. Just seeing that, it was horrifying. It was beautiful and horrifying at the same time, just to see that extraordinary kind of glow without the sound. And then you had the words of the soldiers, the interceptors, because they knew straight away that one had got intercepted. They all knew that was it, that the PAC-3s or Patriots had run out, because every subsequent ballistic that hit, you can see that the impacts sort of going up and being reflected in the cloud layers, and you could feel their absolute anger and frustration that they didn't have the capacity to save lives, and that's their job. Yeah, it just gave me a completely different perspective on it, and it brought home the horror, the senseless terror that Russia is inflicting for no good reason.
Yeah, and I just literally just an hour ago I talked about this with my lady. I said that currently situation in Ukraine, the situation with the air defense is basically like in the first months of the war. Of the full scale, when we didn't have much interceptors to intercept, like even Russian cruise missiles back then.
Yeah.
Uh,
Shaheeds, I mean, let's be clear, the Shaheeds have a very high interception rate because
yeah,
that's Ukrainian technology, Ukrainian brains and innovation, but it's the ballistics of which their production has increased significantly since the start of the war as well.
yeah, absolutely. And I remember like those first months, first 30 days when Kyiv was under siege. Again, we were like in the eye of the storm. And every single day, several air alerts. You go outside after the strike is finished. You see, like we were in Slomensky district. We see like that huge hole in the high rise in the residential building, very tall building, like just a huge hole inside of it, the size of like I don't know 3 or 4 stories. That was absolutely insane, and they just keep coming and coming and coming, and you cannot do anything at all. You just accept it. You just say "fuck you, Russians" all the time, when they strike, but you cannot do anything else. And we were kind of lucky next several years while we still had those interceptors, but now they're gone.
Mm.
And yeah, and it's a completely different story now. We have a few other commentaries. First of all, Hutsuls say that Kadyrov's crew are pussies, and I agree on this partially, only partially, because calling them pussies is basically insulting all the felines on planet Earth, right? They are not that bad. So we have another one from Melchior. I'm not trying to butcher your nickname. I'm so sorry. Lumer still cooked. She says she supports Ukraine now because it's white and Christian. To hell with her. You know what I think? Even though it's kind of truth that when you walk in any Ukrainian city, you can see like primarily Christian and white population, this is not the best reason to support Ukraine.
No.
Because like from I don't know about you, Jonathan, but like from my personal standpoint, fighting for somebody who has like your eye color and your skin pigment is the stupidest idea of all. Absolutely. Like, what do you think about this?
I absolutely, and I'm going to point out that there's something very interesting. We tend, certainly in the West, with higher rates of immigration, we tend to categorize people, and I think there's a certain there's a certain dehumanizing element there when we describe people as black and brown and this and that, and we have all these categories and subcategories and blah blah blah. Ukrainians are Ukrainians. I know Ukrainians who have, let's say, mixed racial heritage, and they do not they do not describe themselves as black Ukrainians, brown Ukrainians, or this or that. They are just Ukrainians. And if you speak Ukrainian and are Ukrainian, you are treated as Ukrainian. And yes, there are fewer people who could be described as having those mixed heritages, but I think it's an interesting quality that sort of goes beyond the sort of classifications which divide us. We also have to point out that um, many who are in not just public, maybe I don't know because I haven't spoken to a huge mass of the general public, but I tend to speak to people who are educated, often who are literary, and there's a very high awareness of the persecution of Crimean Tatars. There's a very high awareness of aspects of their culture, whether it be food, dance, or even literature, as well as historically what's happened and what they're going through now. Um, So to say that Ukraine is white, Christian, etc., is to do a massive disservice to many of the minorities who are considered absolutely Ukrainian and not considered a minority. But there's awareness that other cultures within the territory of Ukraine have been suppressed, and that people are fighting for them and for all who sit under the Ukrainian flag and banner. Robert Brovdemager, who is incredibly well known, you can tell by the name. He's got some, let's say, Hungarian identity there, and there is Hungarian and Romanian sort of minorities, but they're still Ukrainian. There are many who have, dare I say it, Russian ancestry, whether it be parents and grandparents, either mixed ancestry or even Russian on both sides, who call themselves Ukrainians. And I don't think Ukrainians are into this thing of dividing people and categorizing them and labeling them and this, that, and the other. Therefore, the concept of who's fighting for whom, everyone is fighting for everyone. And people who might be inclined towards left-wing points of view are fighting for the right of those with nationalist or right-wing points of view to exist and to be Ukrainian. So I think this is the important thing, not to let political persuasion, demographics, groupings get in the way of the actual humanity and the struggle.
100%. I don't know what to add to this. Like, the main point of supporting Ukraine is not because like Ukraine is white, because generally, like, it's not even the fact. Me, like, one-third gypsy, my ancestors were like stealing horses and borscht, all right. You know, so that's I don't consider myself like, I'm a gypsy Ukrainian. I gotta like steal horses too, even though I have like a
So
farm not
you're
far
part
from
of
me.
the infamous Taganrog horse thieves that Chekhov talked about.
Wars. My ancestors came from Balkans. They were even cooler than those, right? Even more hardcore. But the main idea of supporting Ukraine, which I really, really want other people to understand, is beyond race, all right? Is beyond Christian or Muslim belief. It's because United States are currently 2 steps away from Russian terror, from direct Russian terror. Because if Ukraine collapses, Europe is next, and then the United States are next. And that is the primary reason. Of course, if Laura Loomer supports Ukraine and she talks to millions and millions of her followers about necessity to support Ukraine, of course, it's good, even though she spent years speaking about absolutely opposite and forming their opinion about Ukraine during those years, and working for Russia today and things like that. But if currently she speaks about necessity to support Ukraine, I cannot say that I'm against that at all. I think it's great, and the more people speak about this, I think the better, right? No matter who they are. Anyways, they can change their opinion tomorrow exactly as fast as they changed it yesterday. But in the environment overly saturated with Russian bots and Russian disinformation, that is something that I think is good. Hutsuls, I am not, I swear. The Hutsuls are Hutsuls. Balkan people are Balkan people, all right? But that's the main thing, which slowly brings us to another commentary. This one from Chris. Do you think NATO should strike Russia over the missile in Poland? What can you say about this one?
No, I mean, it would be a start if they just shot the stuff down. Let's start by shooting the stuff down. If Russia has an incursion, either a maritime or an air incursion with any of its assets, you warn them, then you shoot them down. It's exactly what Turkey has done. I don't think we should seek provocation with Russia, but we should enforce our own laws. We should show strength in the correct circumstances. That would include interdicting the Grey Fleet. shutting it down. That would include shooting down anything Russian over our territory without quibbling and any fear. That should include pursuing all the loopholes in sanctions and completely weaning ourselves off any economic dependency, including LNG, which is still being gobbled up in huge doses. Europe pays more for Russian hydrocarbons even now than it pays Ukraine or gives to Ukraine in terms of resource. So this is insane. It's insane. We are literally paying for the perpetuation of this situation, a situation which is costing our taxpayers to help Ukraine, which we're doing half-heartedly. We are I don't even know, I can't even think of an analogy except that we are costing ourselves an absolute fortune by just not doing the job properly the first time. I think we could go further. We could help to substitute Ukrainian troops along their northern border and along their sovereign borders with Europe. I'm not sure Ukrainians would fully and rightly fully trust Europeans to man their northern border, because that way could invite an invasion. But they could help to supplement troops. They could be used in various internal tasks to guard key objectives throughout Ukraine, which would liberate fighting age men to be trained and go to the front. So there are many things we could do. We could also see Western Ukrainian skies and Central Ukrainian skies as an extension of European airspace, and introduce a moratorium on Russian, shit that's flying over the country and shoot that down as well. There are many things we could and should have done. Do I think we're going to? No, because this generation of politicians don't have the courage, the balls, or the strategic insight to do any of these things.
You mentioned one very, very interesting thing, intercepting Russian shit. I have like a rhetorical question, all right? Why can Romanian aircraft, Polish aircraft, or any other aircraft intercept Russian shit over NATO territory, but absolutely cannot do the same over Ukrainian territory? Because when you think about this, all Russian shit that is flying over Ukraine is potential danger for NATO countries. And by closing the sky over Ukraine, you are protecting your own country. And if you don't do that, then you actually have to shoot down the Russian shit over Romania, over
Yes, but there's a big but here, which is that Europe are using, let's say, F-16s and F-35s and whatever, and very expensive modes of interception. So they are using missiles that are worth hundreds of thousands, if not millions, a piece. And sometimes it takes 2 or even 3, especially if they're not practiced at it, to take down a single Shahed. Well, the economics don't stack up. The ratios are appalling. And actually to take the volume of drones that are coming over Ukraine down using the methods that NATO currently employs is completely impractical. There aren't enough interceptors in the world to even do that for a short period of time, which of course the US discovered in the Middle East when it exhausted half the world's supply of interceptors in a couple of weeks, and didn't even make a small dent in the overall supply that Iran can call upon. So unfortunately, yes, it's great in theory, but we haven't mastered, the art of drone interception, Ukrainian style, and the methods that we do use to shoot these down are completely inadequate, and the economics don't add up at all. Which also brings me to the point: what happens, not if, but in my view, when Russia starts sending 1,000 drones a night into NATO territory? Because the cumulative damage, economic and to infrastructure, that could be caused will be on the scale of billions, tens of billions, and we have nothing, really nothing to stop Russia from doing that. Ukraine is the only country on earth that has the infrastructure to prevent wide-scale damage. And let's face it, is Ukraine going to be able to cover the whole European territory with its intercept technology? I would say no. I would say certainly not at this stage. So this is a problem that we shoved to the back of the drawer, but which is really gonna bite us very soon.
Yeah, and I have another. It's gonna bite us if the politicians still will not find any proper political willpower to actually cooperate and talk to Ukrainians more, right? Because like they discuss Ukraine behind our backs or even without our presence, but we are always inviting everybody, join our little club. I have like a very interesting and I would say actually funny commentary from It Wasn't Me. Are there any values in Russia at all? I believe there are. I believe there are because Russians value toilets very much. They value carpets. Of course, not toilets that belong to them. They value carpets. They value plumbing equipment. Air
Carpet's not for the
conditioners.
floor, though. We have to point out the carpet's gone the walls,
Yeah,
which I find very bizarre. But that's
yeah. You as a person who actually was I don't know was cursed to live there for a while. What can you tell us about?
self-imposed. It's totally self-inflicted. Let that
Yeah,
way.
that's Freud would say something about that, my friend.
Certainly would.
What can you tell us about the Russian values generally?
What's interesting, I think you need to understand is it seems to me they're extremely transactional. Extremely transactional. Now, interestingly, Ukrainians are also in some ways, I'd say there's a difference. I mean, Ukrainians are very direct in a way that the English aren't. Many Ukrainians know what they want and they're not prepared to sort of mess around. You get to the point faster by not playing games. But Russians take this far further because you can still be like that. You can still be direct and truthful and raw and yet place value on what you're getting from the other person, the relationship. I think many Ukrainians I've met place a huge emphasis in relationships on kindness. That's not something I've heard many Russians ever really say. I'm not sure that's a quality too many people look for. There are always going to be exceptions. There are always going to be exceptions, of course, to this, but it's not generally a value that much value is placed on kindness and empathy. And it's a really important part, I think, of many Ukrainian relationships. Are there any values at all? It's really difficult to say. I think people talk about the story of the 90s and the early 2000s, especially, of being one of grievance. I think they're getting that completely wrong. Putin weaponized grievance and turned it into a political tool, but that really only accelerated significantly after Bolotnaya, when he needed more and more, coercive and emotive ideas. Prior to that, yes, they were using the eternal parade kind of thing to create a sort of cult of death. But really, that only became fully weaponized as Putin's power started to wane and as he got more paranoid. I think there's one thing that does distinguish the Russians I've known, and which is it's a value, but I think it can be quite a negative one. And that is a sense of nostalgia. That is a sense of almost like picking a scab, wallowing trauma, wallowing in this sense of the past being better than the future. I think that's a really defining feature of many people I spoke to and interacted with. And Ukrainians are completely different. It's more about solving problems and being forward-looking. And then there's some fundamental differences there. So yeah, they're values of a sort, but in the current context, it can be shown that they can become exceedingly toxic.
I agree, and often accused of hating Russians. Like people say, he's a Russian hater, he's a Russophobe, he's like blah blah blah.
Sorry, is
Well,
there something wrong with that?
well, first of all, surprise, I'm not the only one. Second of all,
And when they're trying to kill you, it changes a little bit. I mean, it's a little bit like asking, like, from a horror film, like Freddy or something, the guy in the mask. Why don't you like Freddy when he's got a big scythe and he's coming to try and lop your head off?
yeah. The other day I had a stream with 1420 on his channel, and
Oh, wow, okay.
I was really, really honest by saying that, yeah, a lot of Ukrainians, if not all, actually do hate Russians. Like, I didn't try to pretend and say and be like, too diplomatic about this, because if I say like, oh, all Ukrainians think that we are brothers, and no, like it's long gone, unfortunately, because when you generally think about Russians, it's not Pushkin, Dostoevsky, it's two words: Russian tourists. All right. That's exactly. And if you're looking for like most popular trends in Russia before the full scale, let's say that's either traffic accidents or like gopniks. All right. Like
Mm.
if you're looking at
My
more,
my favorite one is the Russian woman who insults a trans prostitute in Thailand,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then they all pile in and literally kick the living crap out of this Russian.
yeah,
But
because
that's symptomatic, unfortunately. Yeah.
unfortunately, yes. Again, nobody says that all Russians are like biomass, because we have amazing Russian people. We have amazing Russian people in Freedom Corps, or right, Freedom for Russia, in the Siberian Battalion.
Yeah.
Those are amazing people that have my complete support. Again, there are amazing people, for example, Sanctioned Ivan and the Russian dude. First of all, because the Russian dude has the most blue-yellow channel on the internet, which is a proper thing to do if you're a proper Russian person. And they both don't pay taxes to the Russian war machine, which is, again, it's a very proper thing. And when I go to channels like 1420, I express my respect, because those people deserve this respect. Other guys, it one of the most popular questions coming from Russians, or people who actually like root for Russians very much, is what to do so Ukrainians start liking or stop hating Russians. uh, Again, like what to do to like restore the relationship. It's not question to me, all right? I think
No,
it,
it's
like,
really
I'm
not.
not the one to answer this.
Yes. Well, it would be like asking someone who's just been released from Belsen, when are you going to start liking Germans again? It's entirely inappropriate. It's entirely thoughtless. It's crass. It's callous. It's inhumane. It's frankly stupid. It's beyond stupid that someone would ask such a question. But in reality, there's a simple answer. This process cannot even begin until Russians, one, stop trying to kill and erase Ukrainians. This process cannot even begin until the majority of Russians accept culpability for the crimes that were done in their name. This cannot even begin until the criminal regime that launched the genocidal war have been turned into fertilizer or are sitting in The Hague behind bars for the rest of their lives. This cannot even begin until the Russian state pays monetary compensation. This cannot even begin until Russia stops attacking its neighbors and a balanced security architecture is built. Now, I know many Ukrainians will say you have to go a step further and Russia has to be torn limb from limb, etc. And I would love to see that too. But I don't think we can necessarily rely on that, or that's something that will necessarily happen. But until those conditions I've listed are, stop trying to kill Ukrainians, stop trying to destroy their culture, withdraw from their territory, pay compensation, have a sense of culpability, and get rid of everybody who committed the crimes, this process cannot even begin You can't even think of beginning this process. And this process will take generations and generations, during which Russians will have to maintain that sense of culpability for what they've done. So this seems to me a very remote circumstance, which suggests that this will never heal, certainly not in my lifetime.
Yeah,
And
we
nor
have.
should it. Nor
Yeah,
should
yeah.
it.
Absolutely. The only way it can happen, like theoretically, if Russia stops being an empire, and that's the only way. And this is something that we should all work to achieve, right? We have a great commentary that in Russia there was already an answer what to do and what not to do. The simple answer: don't push your Russian style. Не навязывать русский на двух стульях. Don't try to put the Russian spirit on two tables at the same time. The Russian Empire and USSR, as if everybody should live like that, which is, by the way, extremely interesting because the Russians completely enjoy both Russian Empire, Tsarism and all that, and also USSR, and at the same time those two hated each other, like historically. The Bolsheviks basically eliminated the whole Tsarist family. And another thing that I would actually really like the Russians to understand, all Russians, like regardless if they support Ukraine or not, is that a lot of them actually do understand, is that it's very stupid to expect from Ukrainians to actually run towards Russians with flowers and hugs, or stupid to expect from a Ukrainian to think about, oh my God, Moscow is such a great city. What the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, all of this stuff. And how dare someone even ask that question? I mean, as we speak, it's not even on the news reports yet. As we speak, missiles are slamming into Kiev with almost no space apart. I'm just looking at the comps that I'm getting from people on the ground there. They're hearing blast after blast in quick succession. It's clearly ballistic strike. Now there's a short pause, apparently, but we know that the next wave of ballistics are going to, in some instances, try to kill the first responders who are out there trying to rescue people from the rubble. That is happening right now. So how dare anybody ask about reconciliation while this is going on? How dare anybody say, yes, Russia's doing evil things, but what about the great Russian culture? How dare anybody say that Russia be let back into international sport or art or anything that the civilized world sort of conducts or does in terms of relations? How dare anyone even suggest that Ukrainians are unreasonable in not wanting to platform Russians or appear with Russians or in any way have anything to do with any Russians on the international scene? It's, if you've asked these questions, if you expect these kind of things, then frankly, you're grotesque and inhuman, and you really need to look at yourself in the mirror.
100%. To explain it easily, and by the way, I just opened the Telegram channel of Kiev administration, and basically, yeah, we have multiple reports on Russian ballistics incoming in Kiev Oblast, and that's all I saw so far. Obolon district, there was a strike, primarily coming from Bryansk. Yes, and Kursk. And to make it simple, all right, to compare it, so people could understand. A wife meets her husband who literally cheated her 1 million times behind her back, all right, and she goes, "You are a motherfucker, honey. You really are. I want a divorce." And I don't want to have anything in common with you because you committed so many horrible things behind my back, disrespected me, and your other lovers, all right? I don't want to have anything in common with you. And the dude starts like, how can you say all that after all we've gone through? I bring money. I gave you flowers once. Uh, and
On the 8th of March, yeah.
she's like, dude, you have a problem. Fucking solve this problem, because this problem is actually the only and the biggest problem you fucking have. All right? And he's like, no, you're being too cruel to me. All right. So what? So I like fucked all of our like female neighbors. You're saying shit because like, look, I hug you from time to time. I also play guitar. I'm very good at playing guitar or like harmoshka or balalaika. You know, like I'm good at this, and you don't value this. That is why like you hate me for no reason. Same with Russia, 100%. Dudes, you only have one problem. Stop fucking invading other countries and literally behave like Russian tourists you are famous for. That's it. And we will even accept you back into G8 probably. That's it.
Well, this definitely shouldn't happen anytime soon. But yeah, the prerequisite is just stop killing your neighbors, stop interfering in their countries, stop trying to control everything and everyone.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You look at the list of countries they invaded over the past decade. It's fucking crazy. Like fucking Syria on the other side of the globe. Really?
Which is still a pile of rubble in many places, reduced by the Russian Air Force to rubble, which incidentally is what they'll do to your city if you ever allow them to get there, whichever city that is.
Yeah.
They don't discriminate. Yeah.
And when you talk about this stuff, when you talk about their church praying for war, when you talk about their schools teaching kids, not even schools, kindergartens basically teaching Russian kids how to be cannon fodder for like next Tsar, all right? When you talk about that, they fucking nag because like you hate Russians for no reasons. You have one fucking problem. Only one, the biggest problem that you try to ignore as much as possible. Oh, you hit our wild berries warehouse. My like the cargo of Chinese panties burned. You're like evil Ukrainians. You have one problem because half of your taxes go to fuel the war. Fucking read where your budget comes from. And they do everything to ignore this. They, instead of accepting this, like Germans did, by the way, they accepted. Today's Germans are absolutely different people from what they were in 1945. Instead of accepting this, which I just don't know. And one of the reasons why I literally cannot explain this to them, because not everybody will understand. They go like, no, fuck you, you're Russophobes. All right. For no reason at all. Because even though we kill millions of people, but we have Pushkin and Balalaika, and that is why you should love us. That is why it's so crazy, and that is why the more I hear this shit coming from like Russian opposition, common Russian people that are innocent and didn't do anything wrong and shit like that, the more I hear this shit coming from them, the more I support the Russian Siberian Battalion, the Russian Freedom Corps, and the Legion Freedom for Russia, because those are the only couple hundred guys that actually deserve our biggest respect.
And for those that don't understand, the second wave of ballistics seems to be coming in just 20 minutes after the first round, and we know there was an extraordinary young woman killed earlier this week who was a sort of volunteer who'd go to the impact sites to try to help people, and she was killed in a double tap earlier this week. That's incoming, is it? That's live.
Yes, this is Kyiv. This is a footage. Apparently, several warehouses were hit. The Russians are watching what Ukrainians do, and they are, I don't know, maybe they're trying to mimic, because, The Russians spent 4 years bombing civilian people, kindergartens, and maternity hospitals, and all of a sudden, Ukrainians who spent years like building their military potential, they spent like fucking 40 days striking Russian warehouses, and now all Russia is nagging and crying and complaining. They don't know what to do, sleeping in gas queues, because apparently Ukraine doesn't strike civilians, and that is why we win. You know, so that is why they're trying to do the same. However, I don't think that, even if they strike all the hubs of Nova Post, something changes big time, because here in my tiny town in Germany, I have working office of Nova Post, and I can
Nova
send
Post,
packages. Yeah, and in Russia, the wild berries, I think they only work in Russia, maybe somewhere in Kazakhstan, something like that.
Every major urban center has a huge, it seems, Wildberries delivery center. They're very centralized. They're, again, like the Russian system. It's a big territory. They rely on these big distribution hubs. Therefore, they've created infrastructure which is relatively easy to take out because of its extreme centralization. Ukraine has gone for a more decentralized approach to much of its critical infrastructure. That isn't to say there isn't huge losses. Several publishers and several book warehouses have been hit over the last couple of months. In the most recent one, it's shocking. More books were destroyed than were sold in the whole of Ukraine since the full-scale war in one single strike on a warehouse, including almost the entire supply of textbooks for kids in Ukraine over the coming year. I have to ask people in the audience, doesn't this strike you as an echo from history? Destroying books on bulk is something the Nazis did. It's something that Ukrainians, the Russians rather, are entirely intentionally doing. They want to destroy Ukrainian identity. They want to destroy the will to fight. They want to destroy the language. They want to destroy every vestige of whatever is willing to struggle against them, fight against them. They want to destroy, as I say, it comes back to the competition thing. They want to destroy anything and anyone that offers competition or resistance to their monolithic system. It's as simple as that. They want to turn Ukraine into a mini Russia. And if they can't achieve that, then they want to kill absolutely everyone who stands in their way.
And that is why Ukraine keeps protecting everybody, not just itself. And we had plenty of cases from the history when Russians tried to ban Ukrainian language, ban Ukrainian books as early as 1,000 years ago, in fact. And we have more than 100 cases of documented repressions against Ukrainian language throughout the history committed by the Russians, like in all forms, all right, Tsarists, Bolsheviks, communists, etc., etc. It wasn't me, asks Nova Posta in Germany. Not only in Germany, my friend, but generally, I believe in most of European countries. In Germany, I think they have an office in every single, like a department in every single city. So if all the biggest hubs of Nova Posta burn in Ukraine, doesn't stop Nova Posta from existing at all.
They'll find a way.
Yeah,
it's not like a Jurassic Park. Life finds a way. Nova Posta finds a way.
Absolutely. And one thing that I absolutely like and agree with, I think coming from one of your videos, by the way, is that that's the biggest difference between, for example, Amazon and Wildberries, because the Amazon was created in order to help people to sell their stuff conveniently and of course earn money, right? That's Amazon. The wild berries was actually organized the way it is because Russia wants to keep it under control. That's basically the only reason. And that's another reason why they nag so much, losing everything. I have, oh my God, smoked salmon may be on sale. You know when to talk about this, my friend.
Smoked salmon. I was advised, and this is one for the winter, if you ever find yourself in Kiev, if there has been a electricity outage, don't order the smoked salmon. because it may well have been in the freezer and then defrosted. Just a little, and certainly not the krevetki, the shrimps either. Stay off the shrimps, smoked salmon when you're there in winter. Good advice.
100%. Yeah, I can confirm, by the way. Amazon was originally for books. Yes, it's a very, very good shout.
Who's old enough to remember that?
Yeah, yeah. Oh my God, I remember times when phones didn't have cameras. Jesus. And had buttons. Who else builds interceptor systems? So this one is very interesting because as far as I remember myself, we have Raytheon that builds the interceptors for the Patriot systems, Pack 1, Pack 2, Pack 3. Pack 1 is not even interested, not even interesting. We have SAMPT, we have IRIS-T that are kind of capable of shooting down ballistics, but still the Pack 3 for Patriot is much better. It's just so much more advanced, not because it intercepts missiles better, but because it has larger range, approximately 150 kilometers. Why it's important is because the sooner you can intercept the missile, the better, the more time you have to react. Also, Ukraine, the Freya project, which is the joint project between Firepoint, who offer a missile and everything inside this missile, and European partners who offer everything else, including sensors, including radars, control stations, command centers, and all other equipment. And most probably some of the equipment that goes into the missile itself, because it's better to buy them in Europe instead of producing them in Ukraine, because they can be targeted easily. So, do you have to add something to this one?
Oh, I'm on pause there. No, I don't think I have a huge amount to add there, except that I don't think there'll be a solution in a reasonable amount of time to this. Whether it's Raytheon making, Pack 3s under license, that's even to get those permissions is going to take many more months, and then many months of development. The European project, I don't know how close that might be to any kind of deliverable. We know that things like flamingos are getting increasingly more accurate, which is back to the start of the program, which is why Russians tend to, stand there with their video cameras recording these cruise missiles coming over, because they're fairly sure it's not going to hit, random civilians. But when those missiles were first launched, there certainly is some anecdotal evidence that they weren't particularly accurate, that it required many missiles to take out a target. But it seems that has improved. I suspect there'll be the same process of rapid iteration and learning when it comes to interceptors, but the first generation of these new interceptors will not be particularly accurate. Does that help Ukraine in a meaningful time frame? Probably not. Does it help them this winter? Certainly not. Only Pack 3s will help there. And there's something else worrying, which I wanted to flag up, because next time in Kiev, which I will be soon, I'm going to do an episode on this. But as you drive north, and if you look at a map, you'll realize there's huge reservoirs which are dammed north of Kiev. You'll also realize that whereas a lot of Kiev is on high ground, a lot was built on floodplains and is on low ground. Well, for those who don't know, and actually many Kiev residents are unaware of this, Russia has been targeting the dams and has breached the dams in a number of areas. And as we were driving north, I realized that there are many fields that are underwater. There are many woods that are quite eerie, because it's these big birch trees that are dead because they're clearly in floodwater. Russia is trying to commit a sort of urban ecocide on an unimaginable scale, because if they succeeded in taking out those dams north of Kiev, hundreds of thousands of people would find their homes underwater in the way that Kakhovka also. But in that instance, it affected tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands. So Russia is attempting to commit a crime on an historically atrocious scale. And if Western partners, they need to pull their heads out of their asses, frankly. Because if they allow Russia impunity to do this, we're going to see a catastrophic situation, potentially in winter as well. We can't even imagine trying to conduct a rescue effort in these floods if, say, it was minus 15, 20 as it was last winter. We really need to wake up and realize that the only thing that can help Ukraine at this point deal with the ballistics problem and prevent a monstrous crime is to just try and get as many of these interceptors from around the world and get them to Ukraine as quickly as possible. The strikes are happening right now, and it's quite clear that the majority of the ballistics hitting Kiev right now are not being intercepted because the stocks and supplies do not exist. Well, we're building up or potentially allowing an unbelievable humanitarian catastrophe to unfold through our lack of capacity, our weakness, our lack of morality in our foreign policy.
Yes, you're right. And we have several related commentaries. Can the smaller Ukrainian interceptor drone plug in some of the gaps caused by lack of Patriot missiles?
No, it's a different class of interceptor. We're talking about Shaheeds, which are relatively slow moving, and ballistics are entirely different. And there are many classes of ballistics, from the Kinjals to the Zircons to the whatever. I don't know all the distinctions between them, but no, there's a big no. The other challenge we've got here is that there's a new class of drone called a reactive Shaheed. These have a certain rocket mechanism that is intermittent. They don't fly on rocket propulsion the whole journey. They'll come in like the traditional Shaheeds, slow moving, but when they hit a patch of intensified air defenses or they're approaching their target, they'll deploy the reactive component, which is the rocket boost. The speed at the moment takes it outside of the range and capability of the current interceptors. So unfortunately, there is also not just the threat from ballistics, there is the threat from these so-called reactive Shaheeds, which are in very small volumes at the moment. But if Russia was able to increase the volumes of these, then we're unfortunately looking at a period where these munitions get through. And I think it's probably far quicker for Ukraine to develop interceptor technology for reactive drones. The technology for intercepting ballistics is insanely complex and will take a lot longer.
Yeah. You completely covered this question, by the way. Could AI be used for prediction of those missiles? So, the answer to this is it's very easy to predict ballistic missile, actually, because it doesn't change trajectory much.
It's not difficult. In fact, it goes beyond that, in that the air defense teams can see, they can track, the planes in the sky. They know that there are certain areas where Ukraine has air defense systems that could theoretically intercept, the Tu-95s and all the rest of it. So, of course, they release their missiles and ordnance and glide bombs and whatever outside of the zone where they can be intercepted by Ukraine. So the pattern of release, the location of release is widely known. The trajectory and the speed often is predictable. So you know where those are going to hit. I mean, it's no coincidence that the air defense unit I was with said, look in that direction in 3 minutes, and bang, on target, these things hit. We have to ask ourselves, knowing when they're going to strike, what does that really do if you don't have the tools to intercept and take them down? What is that? It just gives you a sense of dire premonition and helplessness.
That's the point. The problem is not calculating their trajectory. The problem is reaction time. That's problem number one when you have interceptors. And when you don't have interceptors, that is the problem itself. It'd be great if a way to find to stop ballistic missiles before they are launched. Yes, yes, this is one of the good ideas, which, by the way, we can already see being turned into life. All right, so in the Russian rear.
What happens then if Russia, say, were to use their ballistic launch sites for these kind of strikes? Would Ukraine strike Russian nuclear-capable bases and silos that are being used to attack Ukraine in a non-nuclear fashion? Is that escalation? Is that something foreign partners would freak out about? Is it possible that Russia would stage a provocation where a limited nuclear device goes off after Ukrainian strike and is used in propaganda? To those who think that Russia would not stoop that low as to poison its own territory intentionally just so it could point and go, haha, Ukraine did this. Well, I'm afraid you're not paying attention to how the Russian regime thinks and acts.
100%. They think, okay, what kind of shit can we accuse Ukraine with? All right.
And of course, they know it works in the foreign media to an extent as well.
Yeah. And usually what they do, they go, okay, what sort of shit do we commit ourselves? All right, killing civilians, I don't know, striking houses. Yes, let's accuse Ukraine of doing that because that's exactly what you can see.
And when they realize it's not enough, which eventually they will do, then the question is, what do they do next? I mean, negotiation is not what they're going to do. They're going to ratchet it up and say, okay, well, if this stuff hasn't affected Ukrainians, then, well, let's see what we can find that does. I mean, it's delusional, but it suggests that actually this winter is going to be tough again, simply because Russia wants to snuff out any possibility of maintaining civilization and compatibility with life in the major Ukrainian cities. So we can kind of feed from that what things might look like in the winter, and it's certainly not good.
Yeah, and you mentioned the strategy, right? The Russian strategy, guys. During the last episode, we talked about Russians, including the mentions of so-called special military operation, into the books of Russian language in the schools. All right. Why do they do that? Because it takes time for Russians to actually adopt something, all right, to actually implement some changes into those books for school kids. And it also takes time for kids learning those books to grow up. Currently, they talk about the war as early as in the kindergarten to like 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. They will grow up, they will become adults 13 years from now. That's all you need to know about Russia's strategy, about Russia's like peaceful intentions and everything else, because Russians are building the army while it's still in the school, right? While it's still in the kindergarten. Their strategy doesn't include anything about peace talks, negotiations, nothing like that. Their strategy is much more important to them. And by the way, Putin will, no price will be high enough for Putin at this point. Because
no, I don't think it is. I talked about this earlier to someone. I said, look, we disagreed a little bit on what might happen subsequently, but I said, look, throwing another 1 to 2 million lives into the senseless meat grinder is well within Putin's capacity over the next year, and he likely will ramp up repression while this is happening, and it will deliver minimal results. There'll be many Ukrainian casualties in cities from strikes, which will intensify, and there'll be many more people at the front. But if the current ratios of anything from 8 to 1 to 16 to 1, depending on where you're getting the numbers from, Russia will expend those lives to very little effect, and it certainly won't get the whole of Donbass, which seems to be the minimum requirement for Russia to declare that the current round of warfare is over. No, Putin's going to feed a lot more bodies into this. But I think you will need to ramp up repression in order to do it. Not that there'll be a popular uprising, but there may well be some disjointed expressions of discontent, or more typically, Russians would vote for their feet by heading to the borders and leaving when it comes to these mobilization pressures. I think this time around, Putin has built the architecture of terror and repression, which means that people will not physically be able to leave their cities. They will not be able to buy plane tickets or train tickets out of the country. They will essentially be locked in their houses and their neighborhoods. They will not have the digital infrastructure to deliver goods and services to those houses anymore. So it's back to this extraordinary story by, I think it was Evgeny Zamyatin, who studied, I think, at a British Naval College and was an admirer of H.G. Wells. I don't want to push Russian literature as such, but he had an interesting story about the Russian Civil War and describing how these civilized St. Petersburg apartments had been turned into something without light, without heat, without food, where people had been burning the furniture to stay alive and stay warm. And he described that civilization, that sophisticated St. Petersburg life. He said that our apartments have become caves, peshore. They'd reverted to something really primitive and pre-civilization, almost in an instant. Well, I'm afraid to say, Russians, this is coming for you. This is coming for you now. Your whole civilization is going to be burnt to the ground, and you'll be back in the caves of your joyless apartments, without heating, without food, without luxuries, without all the little niceties that stoke your privilege and your comfort and your sense of security. You're not going to have any nice things. You'll be lucky to even have food and stay warm. And that's not because Ukrainians want you to suffer. It's because your own Tsar that you've stood behind is going to force you into living like this.
Yeah. Blame Putin. What more can I say? Blame Putin. We have a few updates. We will call it a night in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I wanted to show you.
I'm starting to fade. You can probably tell. I've got my
yeah.
I only got back from Kiev, and I'm like, I haven't quite caught up with my sleep yet.
Yeah, you absolutely deserve to have a rest. So we have a report on the Russian Shaheds currently flying towards Kiev. Again, we're talking about the combined strike, including the ballistic missiles and the Russian Shahed drones. So they're coming primarily from Bryansk and Kursk, and I can see Donetsk Oblast as well. We have literally two commentaries that I want to talk about. First of all, you made a comment in another post about war crimes against children and Russian soldiers. Can you tell again? I can tell, and I can even show it, but unfortunately it's in Ukrainian language, but I will translate. So, since 2022, as of this morning, the Russians committed 231,037 crimes against Ukraine. We are talking specifically about the criminal cases opened against the Russians due to the documented crimes. Among those crimes, they committed 213,877 war crimes. And speaking of those, we're talking about crimes against civilians, not only literally shooting them on the ground like they did in Bucha and Irpin, but also striking them with drones and missiles, and like that most recent attack on Ukrainian men selling groceries. And if you look at the bottom right corner, there's 152 criminal cases that involved Russian sexual abuse of minors. That's just so you could understand what we're dealing with. Russia invaded Ukraine having 200-something thousand men, and they have already committed more than 200,000 crimes against Ukrainians.
It's an obscene amount. It's an obscene amount. It really is. And just the breakdown of some of those crimes, it varies from the truly, hideous to theft and destruction and so on. But some of those crimes are beyond appalling.
Yeah. And the final question, I will let you go because you're
Yeah,
fading.
pretty fading.
Yeah, it's I don't know, maybe it's like rhetorical, but generally, do you think Europe should federalize to finally escape these populist pro-Russian crooks that keep popping up everywhere? And how can we achieve this? What do you think about this?
I'm,
Term is the term of political nation outdated nowadays, and we can federalize Europe into United States of Europe?
I think, unfortunately, my solution to Russia, my admiration of Ukraine and how it's managed to transform itself, I have to recognize that only through a process of decentralization can Russia be fragmented into parts that have any hope of eventually developing anything that could be described as democracy. Ukraine's Maidan revolution of dignity succeeded because it embraced radical decentralization as well as digitization of many government services. So the idea that centralization can solve anything, no, I think it's far more likely to exacerbate the problem because under a centralized system, a fully centralized or federalized system, people don't feel they have agency, can't take control, how decision making becomes more opaque. Um, Rumor, conspiracy becomes a common currency within politics. You become more Russified, not less. You open yourself up more to conspiratorial thinking. And the lack of agency, the lack of political agency that people have leads to extreme politics and extreme solutions. So, no, federalization is the opposite of a solution to these problems. What we need is a form of radical redemocratization, albeit it's good for countries to cooperate, but we need more democracy, more distribution of powers, not fewer. But we do also need for there to be a recognition of the danger that Russia poses to European democracy. That process has not gone nearly far enough as it needs to.
I can discuss this forever, but my friend, I need to let you go because you did a very, very long way from Ukraine to your home.
24 hours, 24-hour end to end. And I just, and I was in London today recording interviews. So I'm starting to literally sort of, fall apart.
My friends, Jonathan Fink, legendary, absolutely legendary. Please subscribe if you still haven't. I think that everybody did already. And my dear friends and family, first of all, I would like to say thanks to everybody who donates to our tiny, tiny cause, to our fundraiser to provide Ukrainian border guards with a truck. If you want to learn more, please check out the link in the description. It's the very, very first link. Secondly, Jonathan, big thanks to you, my friend. I'm so glad to hear that and know that you're fine. Again, a lot of my friends from Europe are now in Ukraine, and I keep monitoring all the time. It's crazy. So, is there anything you would like to say to our dear family there on the other side of
No,
the screen?
just to say, I've got a bunch of interviews I've recorded which aren't yet published. Look out for them. Some I think are truly original. People won't have heard them before. I've got the founder and commander of Achilles, which I managed to do an hour and a half interview with. Extraordinary privilege to have been able to do that. I recorded an interview in the Hartia headquarters somewhere in Kiev. Can't tell you where OS because I'd have to shoot you. And there's lots of conversations which people are going to find, I think, deeply original and meaningful. But if they can't wait for those, then I strongly recommend have a look at the one I just recorded with Yevgen Khlopotenko, who is an extraordinary human being, and it's just wonderful, concentrated burst of Ukrainianness. And you should, go and see that. That will reinvigorate your sense of outrage and your sense of life and vitality, and make you understand what Ukrainians are fighting for. But he's just an extraordinary human, an extraordinary Ukrainian. Go and watch that.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason I love Yevhen Klopotenko is not because he's cool. I love him because he's a chef. And if you know my channel, you know what I mean. All right, dear friends, thank you so much. Let's see you later. Let's let Jesus Christ, Jonathan, have some sleep. And also, I won't steal your time, my dear friends, anymore. Be safe. Miss you, love you, and I will see you soon.
Speak soon.